ahead and introduce yourselves, why you are here talking to us today, and then go ahead and get into your story.
Okay. I am Colleen, and this is my husband Charles, and we're here to speak about our experiences in home birthing. We have 4 daughters. 2 of our daughters were born in a hospital, and 2 of our daughters were born at home. What started our journey to home birth to begin with is, first off, we came late to having children, so we were already over the age of 30. And when my first daughter was born, I was actually 34 years old. And the reason why that's even relevant is because that put me in a category of calling me an at-risk mother. And so because of that, they kind of asked me for a lot more information. I had to take a lot more testing. I had to see the doctor for a time almost weekly. Even though there wasn't any physical indication that there was anything wrong, this was my journey, and because of my age and the procedures that were required, that's what I had to go through. And we were really excited. Like I said, it was our first child, and I was looking forward to her birth with great anticipation, and I was reading all these books and magazines that were given to us at the time, and we were very much part of the culture that would just sort of leave everything in the hands of what we thought were, the experts and the doctors. And although I had a pretty decent doctor and nothing really untoward happened, the closer and closer I got to our due date, which happened to be for that child near Thanksgiving, the closer and closer my doctor wanted to monitor me. And it wasn't until I realized that she was going off on vacation that is possibly why the things that happened to me in the hospital happened. Some of the interventions that I went through was Pitocin to induce my daughter. The timing of it occurs. They slow it down or speed it up according to the schedule of the doctor. They put a monitor on my daughter's head. There's a lot of different things. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I just want to say that I became very suspicious during the whole procedure when they would say things like, "The baby's in distress, her heartbeat's beating quickly." I would take deep breaths and calm myself, and I would literally hear the heartbeat lower. So I questioned what heartbeat they were monitoring, or if my stress was what they were reading more than anything else. But in the end, after all the interventions that I went through, I didn't go through a C-section with that child. But at one point, I think the moment for me is when she caught my baby. After she sent me, she caught my baby, and she handed her baby off, and she literally ran out the door because she had a plane to catch. And then I sat there with the cleanup, kind of a little bit in shock. I'm waiting to see my daughter and excited as they've got her over in the corner monitoring her. And I think a moment there for me was when a man came in to clean up the trash, and I was spread open for all the world to see, and he turned and looked at me and waved. And so here was my first child. I was this exciting moment, a very intimate moment, and I just kind of felt used. I kind of felt a little abused, and I tried to put that aside and just enjoy my new baby. For our second child, again, I don't know why I didn't go off and look for another doctor. I thought, well, this is how it must be, and maybe I expected more, and I just need to put that aside and follow the directions of the doctors as we go along. So the second child, I'm 3 years older, and there's even more interventions that they're trying to talk to me about. I'm paying lots of money to go have this imagery done once a month. That is just, I think it's $1,400 an image again and again and again. And it's only when the nurses in those facilities started asking me if everything was okay, did I need to be here, was I getting a hint that maybe, again, I was being used. and maybe these things weren't necessary. There were other procedures that they did that it wouldn't be till later that I would find out were potentially damaging to myself and to my child. But I had pretty much abdicated my authority, my responsibility, and I think I hold some of that as my fault. When I was going through her birth, I was being pushed really hard now for C-section. And I said no prior to. I said, no, there's nothing wrong. The baby's the same size. I have the same amniotic fluid as I did last time. Everything is fine. Well, this was another birth right before a holiday, this one being Easter. And again, my doctor's on her way to vacation. And like I said, as things started to line up to be the same as they were the last time, I was struggling with my sort of depression. It was hitting me. And I then went just weeks before her due date, if you will, or the date that the doctor told me she would be due. I started talking to women who'd had home births, and they were very encouraging, but 2 weeks out, I didn't have the courage to yet step out. And so I stayed with this doctor. I was induced. Again, all the other interventions happened. Only this time around, my doctor seemed to, maybe her flight was sooner than the last one, because she was very abrupt. And even the nurses asked her to do certain things she wouldn't do. And they asked her to stay because she had given me something that had a potential allergic reaction. And the nurses knew it. And irregardless of that, she had a flight to catch, so she left. And unfortunately, the situation next to us was a young woman was in true distress, and she was going through a C-section. And the word they use is that she crashed, but the whole staff left our room after my daughter was born. They placed her on my belly and literally left the room. And they had that emergency to deal with. And because it was before Easter, again, it was a short night of staff. And so the whole staff on the floor was assisting this woman. And as far as we know, she died. I just wanted to leave. I just felt like, I don't know how to explain it. It's not quite as traumatic as rape, and you might want to take that out of here. But I felt like somebody who'd been almost raped, like to the point where the people you trusted and hurt you. You didn't think they were going to hurt you, but they hurt you. And they left. Our baby was alive, but all these different interventions that they had put me through made this a very arduous and difficult birth. Just like the one before. And my husband was equally
frustrated. I ended up cleaning up my wife at that point, cleaning up the room, cleaning up the baby. We actually fed the baby on my wife's breast because we were experienced at that time on breastfeeding. Once the baby fell asleep, we put her in the tub to keep her warm, and I got my wife to sleep. And then the minute my wife fell asleep, I actually went and got her food, brought her back food. She ate, and then after that, I pestered everybody to get us out, and we were out of that hospital at 5 a.m.
Yeah, as soon as possible. I didn't want to. I knew I'd already paid for everything.
I found a pediatrician on call that would check out our baby. Once they checked out the baby, we left.
So after those two experiences, when I became pregnant with my third daughter, my third child, I knew that I didn't want to go through the same experiences. I knew that there was a place for the hospital. And what I meant by that is, like, sick people go to the hospital, emergencies for the hospital. There is a reason that there's a time when you need a surgeon, but not for an everyday healthy birth. With our third child, we began the journey of meeting with our midwife, meeting with a doula. I was invited to a friend's birth, and I got to watch her birth, and she was so professional on it. She made it look easy. And it just gave me an idea. I read different books this time, and I sat almost 10 months, I'd say almost 10 months, with women once a month at least, where they would talk about their birth stories, talk about their upcoming birth, talk about just life as a mother, raising children, raising multiple children, being wives, being single mothers, whatever their situation was. I finally, or was having information coming to me from many different perspectives. And I was learning just things that I didn't even know about my own parenting difficulties, or what it would be like if I had a tongue-tied baby, or all these other issues that happen with motherhood, and early motherhood especially. And I began to realize that it really was my responsibility all along to know what about my own body, to know about the health of my own body, to know about what birthing is or can be, the different complications that can happen, what happens to your body when you take Pitocin, what happens to your body when they snip you or cut you or give you any type of drugs, what could potentially happen when you are home birthing, how do you what different ways that you can have a birth at home, what are the legal ramifications. And one of the things that we get to enjoy in the state of Nevada is that I can do this without interventions. I can do this without interventions from someone inspecting my home, someone tell my midwife what she must do, tell my doula what they must do, or how I must birth. One of the other things is, in the hospital, I must birth in a certain manner. I must birth laying down on my back, with being hooked up with lots of things. Home birth allowed me to move when my body needed to move, and to rest when my body needed to rest. It allowed me to be in the most comfortable place I could be, calmly, with the people I love around me, and who couldn't be with me in a hospital birth. It allowed my children to be present when they couldn't be at their age in the hospital with me.
Allowed us to be comfortably in our house. She was actually comfortably in her bed. I almost delivered the baby. We had kind of waited and finally called the midwife, and then one of our friends came over and says, well, you better get her in the tub because the baby's coming now.
Well, she asked me where I wanted to birth, and I love water, so I'm a birth in the tub in the water. And so that was right here, had a huge, beautiful tub, nice warm water, and I got to walk from my room and to relax there. I guess why it was a surprise and why we didn't call the midwife right away is because when my waters had broke, she was expecting it to be hours later. So we went grocery shopping, we got food, we settled the children, and I had not yet gone through the whole process that my body does, because in both cases before I had been induced, and that is according to whatever their schedule is, not really what my body's doing. So probably about 2 hours after my water, I was lying down, which is, those of you who've home birthed, you know what stage I'm at that point. So, but we did not. And so I was laying down and meditating, and I like the Bradley method. And so I was doing, things to just relax myself and let my body do what my body was going to do. Well, about, what do you think, 2-3 hours later, I'm not sure of the time, because my body was doing what it needed to do, and I was just there for the ride, basically. And so when our friend came over, like my husband said, my daughter was about to be birthed, and they asked me where I wanted to have her, and I said in the water. So we came out to the pool, I guess on my knees, gave birth. Okay.
Yeah, literally 15 minutes after the midwife showed up, the baby was here.
Yeah, so she was there to fish her out. How's that? So no catching the baby this time. Just, is someone going to pick up the baby? I remember her saying that. But we were just so, I don't know. I was in shock. It was a lot of work. My body did what it was supposed to do. We had another healthy child. I had friends and family. I got to have my children come and cut the umbilical cord. I got to go to my own bedroom and sleep in the most comfortable bed, not a hospital bed. They weighed her. They cleaned up. It was wonderful. It was everything that we would have wanted. And we were blessed by it. So when we came to be pregnant again with our fourth child, we like to use the doctors for, monitoring our child's health. Because at this time I was 40, and being 40 at that time, I thought, okay, I want to know her gender, I want to know her health, and so on and so forth. But this story was a little different. I will name this daughter. Her name is Beatrix. And Beatrix, at 12 weeks, our perinatal specialist, whom I was seeing because of my age. So perinatal specialist indicated to us that she wasn't going to live. And that in fact, we didn't know her gender at the time, but he said, this baby's not going to live. And beyond that moment, I think what I'd like to say is that the experience I had was then expecting any day that my body was going to expel my baby. And he told me in very graphic detail what could possibly happen. And I don't want to name him, but I was going to say there was a lot of pressure to abort her at that time. And that was pretty devastating. My husband was on the road, and what's devastating about it is it's very emotional, and I was feeling like the person who should be there advocating for me and for my child now seems adversarial. He's not just because he was telling, I think he was doing the best he could. I'd like to say that, but that was pretty rough to hear and go through at the time. So I just listened to him. I listened to everything he said. Worst case scenario, if she'd live, all these things. Because as week went by week, she didn't die. And we found out her gender, and we found out her health, and we found out that she had Down syndrome. And we found out that her heart would need surgery, and we found so month after month, as the doctors would tell me these terrible stories about what she was going to be like when she was alive, God was telling us a different story, because she just kept living. And I became aware of her like I hadn't with my other children. And I would think of her. I would try to learn about what it would be like to raise a Down syndrome child. We had small groups. We had friends at church. We had many people praying for us. I was able to talk openly about our experience with individuals, and what seemed like a horrid thing became a beautiful thing. It became the life of our daughter Beatrix. Because believe it or not, a Down syndrome baby can be born at home. And in fact, even children with heart issues are better off being born not through cesarean or C-section, but through the birth canal. But there is a risk in that. And the risk with the Down syndrome child is that they don't always know what else might be wrong besides the heart. And sometimes the stress of birth can cause the baby to die. So under those circumstances, we thought the best choice was to have a hospital birth. And I wanted to say during this whole time that my doula and my, whom this doctor really liked, and my midwife, who had a relationship with this doctor, were with us through many of the visits that we were going through the hospital. So it sort of had an adversary and an advocate. And then over time, this doctor became more of an advocate when he realized that we weren't going to abort our baby, that we were going to welcome her however she was, that life is not defined by what he thought it should be defined by, and that death was not in our hands but in God's hands. We came to a conclusion that it would be best for her to be born in the hospital. So then after that, the whole team for the heart specialist became about when to have the surgery. And then it also, for Down syndrome and heart babies, actually for all babies, nursing is really good and really healthy. So then it became how to nurse her in the NICU, what kind of obstacles to go through in that scenario. So it was the week before, it was Christmas that year, was on Saturday, and Wednesday was my last visit with my doctor. And we both sort of looked at each other, because we wanted her to stay in the womb as long as possible, because that was the healthiest place to be for her. But there was a point when we were going to have to plan the C-section. And so we both looked at each other and said, okay, we're ready. And after Christmas, I'll be there Monday morning, and this is when she'll be born. And so holiday celebrations, my midwife happens to have a birthday on Christmas Eve, so I popped in on the midwife circle that she was having that day, said happy birthday, and thought it would be fun to listen for my daughter's heartbeat. And my midwife couldn't find it. And so we went to the hospital to confirm what she already knew. And while we were there, the doctor on call couldn't find a heartbeat, and my doctor was en route. So when my doctor arrived, he confirmed that my daughter had died sometime between the Wednesday visit and Friday. And as I naturally began to weep, of course I began to weep. I was filled with hope and love. I had a live baby, and I expected to have to birth a live baby. There were other women there being monitored, and I think out of deference to not wanting to scare them, they moved me into one of the birthing rooms that they had there in the hospital. And he continued to just counsel me, and I sat on the little bed that they had there, and my husband and I talked. And he then talked to me about what it could possibly be like if how we were going to go about birthing now my daughter's body. I didn't make any decisions. I didn't say okay. I just said okay. I just was nodding my head, listening. We went that night and gathered our family and our friends, and we, believe it or not, went to church and sang Christmas carols and cried my eyes out. But the very next day...
We waited until the day after Christmas.
Okay.
We celebrated Christmas with our daughters. It was a hard day, but, we still have to parent the other 3 kids and give them love and enjoy the Christmas day. And we got through that day, and then we contacted the midwife and on the 26th to see what the options for home birth was. We didn't, at this point, knowing that the baby had passed, we didn't want to go through the hospital procedures because we'd already talked to a few people, and they said, yes, they're going to, do a cesarean. They'll pull out the baby. They'll give you maybe 15, 20 minutes with the baby. Then they're going to take the baby away. And that's your mourning process. That's what you get in the hospital when your baby passes in a stillborn situation. We didn't want to do that. So we started pursuing what it would take to actually have a home birth for a stillborn child. And let me tell you, there was some roadblocks at first. There's people that like, well, maybe, the doctor was a little nervous because he says, we don't know the state of her decomposition. She could fall apart during the birthing process. You may not get a whole baby. So there was some of that fear, but we wanted to do it. Our midwife made contacts. We actually got another doctor to come in here during the birth so they can sign the death forms that the baby was born stillborn because there's legal issues.
Palm Mortuary.
Had to notify Palm Mortuary so they could come pick up the child when we were ready.
To come to our house.
When we were ready.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is on the 28th of December, my wife starts to go in labor for this child. We have everything set up, the tub, and like the other home birth, we go through the process. This one was a little longer. We were here about 14 hours. But when the child did come, there was no issue. Came out in whole. And then we have the opportunity, everybody in our family, grandparents, my mom, her mother, everybody got to hold the infant before,
That's smart.
and spend time. And then when we were ready, we were able to call Palm Mortuary, and they came, and they were very respectful, and they picked up the child and took her to the morgue. There was no questions. There was no issues.
There was no alarms from people coming because they had to call somebody. I've heard stories that, even just with family on hospice care, well, they'll show up with everything blazing and come in the door. So it wasn't like that. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful day. My midwife, what I did want to add is now how I told you how my doctor was kind of adversarial at first. Well, he was much more of an advocate at the end of this long experience through Beatrix's life. And we did invite him to come. And he declined because his lawyer said no. And I understand that, but we had another doctor who was willing to come, and that was a blessing as well. But my midwife, who had already had this relationship this whole time with my doctor, with me, was able to call him the day of and to talk about different procedures. She was able to confer with him and anybody she wanted to. Like I said, there wasn't any restrictions. There weren't any interventions that prevented us from doing what we could to the best of our ability to have this home birth. And having Beatrix here and all the ways that she was born, I know it's going to kind of sound silly, but after her birth, I expected her to be alive. And I know that's silly, but after all that laboring, that's what you get, is the joy of a baby. And a baby, well, mine was gone. And the brave and lovely women who did this with me, who took care of me and took care of my family and took care of my daughter and helped me tremendously. And my husband and I actually sat here with our daughter for as long as we needed to, wrapped in blankets. I got to see, she had brown hair. I didn't get to see her eye color, but I got to see all her features and hold her hands and look at her little feet. I think that if we hadn't had that home birth, that we would not be as healthy and whole as people and in our mourning with this daughter as we have been. To have that time, to have the birth, to have the family and friends, to not worry about how much money each minute we were in a room was, or being pressured for anything at this point, not having those things. Let us just focus on the love that we had for our daughter, the love that we were now having to give, the hopes and dreams that we had for her, these things that we were having to give up to God because she was no longer with us. We wouldn't have had that, I think, in a hospital. I think it would have been very possible, like the other experiences I had, where I walked away feeling like something had been taken from me. Something I had agreed to that wasn't as good for me as it should have been, and something I felt culpable in. And this time around, just like with the birth that I had before, it felt right. It felt like the best thing it could be. And so when our daughter left and they took her to the morgue, those same friends that I talked about, they did something special for me that I didn't even know about till later. And they went and took a cast of our daughter's hands and her feet and a little bit of her cheek. And what that is so I have something sort of tangible to hold. We had friends here who were taking pictures, just had things to help me through the years when I would miss my daughter, and just ways to think of her and have her with us. And those same people helped us when it came to her memorial, and the people who came around us when it came to her burial. I think that all of us love our children, and when our children leave us or when they die before we obviously expect them to, it leaves a hole that's there all the time and for the rest of your life. And there's a healing, though, that can happen, and a place where that longing for that child is sort of, it can be a bit sweet when you've healed correctly, or healed in a way where you think of that person and you think of the time that you had, whether they were just 3 months in your womb, whether they were with you for a few years after they were born, whatever time that you lose your child, even if, like I said, it's been 3 weeks, after conception. You may not have known their gender, but you knew that you wanted them, and you knew that they were a gift to you, and you knew that you were going to be changed forevermore because of that life. And just to kind of disregard that because of interventions and procedures that need to happen in a hospital, it's not always the best way to go about birthing. And so God never blessed us again with another child, although we kept trying. And but so if we'd ever had another child, we would have always picked home birthing. And yes, I talk to my daughters constantly about the home birthing option and how we are able to do what we do in the state of Nevada in a way that I could not in any other state.
So having the child here, being born, knowing that she'd passed away, is a lot like doing hospice care, being in your house when you pass away. When we've had both parents pass away, and they always seemed a lot more comfortable when they were in their house or in the house of a loved one passing away. I think that also helps the people around them to mourn better. We've been to one person that passed in the hospital, but they weren't close, but it was really, okay, they passed, we bagged them up, you guys got to go stand in the lobby, go meet somewhere else to mourn. It's really a detached environment. We just didn't want to have that experience. We're blessed that we lived in this state at a time where we could actually have that happen. I checked on the internet, and a lot of states just say, no, you have to do this in a hospital, and they don't give you a choice in it. And hopefully we don't lose that right here in the state of Nevada.
I like how you put that it was like hospice. Just a couple last year, both my mother and my stepfather came into our home, and we got to be with them the last week of their life, and we got to be here when they died as well. And I think my home birthing experience has prepared me for that in a way of caring for someone that's intimate and personal, and in a way that's gentle and on their own time and in their own way. I wouldn't say on their own way, because we don't control everything. So when you're home birthing, you don't control everything that happens. That's things happen. Your body does things. Your life is the way it is. We don't control those things. And I think that it gave us an ability to care for our parents when they passed away. And I like how you said that that we wouldn't have had that experience with our daughter if we'd had that in a hospital. That would have been
I think it would have just made it harder to recover from.
Yeah. Well, I would say there was a lot of, like I told you before, where I kind of felt violated or abused a bit in those other experiences. It's also because of the bill, because what we paid for those experiences. My first two daughters, I paid $10,000 each, plus the monthly insurance that we pay. And there was nothing wrong with them, and there was nothing wrong with me. And all the interventions I had with those two babies were not necessary. There was no necessity for them. There was no evidence that should have made me make those choices. I didn't even know I had those choices. That's how that was. When we were told in the hospital that Beatrix had died the second time, where my doctor had to be the one to confirm. I don't know why. He just did. I don't know why the first one wasn't good enough. They charged us $1,400 for 15 minutes in a room. So the bill that I got afterwards, it causes a bitterness. And like I said, I'm not trying to change that situation or that health system. I just say that health system has a place. Like if Beatrix hadn't died and Beatrix needed to be born through a C-section, and she needed to have the NICU, and she needed that heart doctor there, then I gladly am using that system. I was gladly using that system. I would have thanked every one of them for all the work that they did. And I might have argued about some of the bills, but I would have understood that that's what it costs to save her life, to keep her alive. But in most cases, and with my experience, my three other daughters none of them needed to be in the hospital. Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you're sick. And if there's no evidence of needing those interventions, then they're risky and they could cause more harm than you might otherwise know.
Can you touch a bit on your recovery, like your postpartum experiences between your first daughter, your second daughter, your third,
Oh, sure.
and then Beatrix?
Sure. So,
Sleeping in bed was awesome.
yeah. So after each birth, so with my first child, they whisk her away. I didn't know to ask to keep her and to keep her.
I followed her, though.
uncut. But yeah, I mean, they just whisk her over to examine her and wash off all that really good stuff that they shouldn't be washing off. Didn't know any of that. And so afterwards, we stayed up all night. It was very uncomfortable. It was very hot. I had to wait hours for the pediatrician to come the next day. It was Thanksgiving Day, by the way, and we wanted to go and be home. And when he finally showed up, poor man, he had been working all night and he had had different babies leave stuff on him. I thought he was a homeless man who wandered into my room, and I said, "Who are you? Get out of here." Sorry. So anyways, when he told me, "I'm here to let you go," I'm like, "Wait, come back." So he signed us off and off we went. I think just the joy of having our child sort of overshadowed what that was like to finally leave the hospital the next day at 6 o'clock at night after staying all day. I guess if we'd been charged hourly, I'd be angrier, but we already paid for the room, so we just paced in the hospital till they let us go. I couldn't have certain people visit. It's limited who could come into the room, so that was a little less than desirable, but off we went. My second daughter, that scenario, as my husband explained it, was a lot worse. We didn't have anybody to help us clean up. When he said evacuated, we'll leave it at that. We had a lot of stuff that came out of my body because I had an allergic reaction. I couldn't move because, of course, they gave me all that stuff, so I can't move and get up and take a shower. So this is my husband's first, experience with our second daughter. And anyways, in that case, I knew a little better, and I had her put her on my belly, and I nursed her right away and held her as long as possible before they started doing anything. And like he said, we got out of there as soon as possible. Again, I can't really tell you about my health. I would say with both children, it was a bit interrupted. Like the first night of their life at home wasn't calm and peaceful. The babies didn't sleep as much. I didn't sleep as much. We were agitated. And I can only say that because the difference of my third daughter is when after she was born, I just took a little shower and went right to bed nursing my baby. So I nursed her, placed her right into bed, and I think I woke up like 8 hours or 9 hours later. And my baby woke up, and we just nursed, and off we had a lovely baby moon in the bed all day while my husband and children totally took care of me and everything.
You had to drain the tub and clean up.
Yeah. Yeah, they did all the work. But I will say that...
you did all the work.
Well, I know I did different work. How's that? My work was different. And now my
Wait
time
until you
was-
have to drain the tub.
Yeah, well, and now my time was to rest. And we did. We slept better. We rested better. There wasn't any agitation. My third daughter I would call her full term, because the other two were the exact same weight and born the exact same week because the doctor wanted it that way.
Both of them were 7 1/4, and our third daughter that was born at home was 9 pounds.
She was almost 10 pounds. And no, I didn't need to be cut. I didn't need any drugs for any pain. None of all the other things I thought I needed, I didn't need them. My body is designed, God designed it a certain way. Everything did as God designed it. And it was lovely. So I will say I did get a slight fever, which could happen. And so, again, because of the way things are, the doctor that we had, I was able to prescribe me, without having to go anywhere, just some antibiotics. And a completely different scenario than what it would have been like in other situations outside of a home birth, outside of having a midwife and the doctors who work together. before I knew that that system was there, and I was using just the hospital, when I got sick soon after, I think I was having some problems with nursing, and I got a slight infection. I had to take me and my baby out of the house and to the hospital, sick, not wanting to drive, and to have that. So there's a difference in being able to do this at home and in a type of care that's just, I don't know, just can't be beat. So with Beatrix afterwards, I was blessed to have a baby who was still nursing. And so that helped me a lot as well. But through that process, if I had had to wean or had to stop myself from lactating, I knew women around me who were there to help and give it plenty of advice. So those are the ways that it's different.